I'm about to drive 500 laps of the hardest track on the F1 game on a controller. The average Monaco Grand Prix lasts for 70 laps, and in this video I'm going to try not to give myself brain rot by driving over 7 Monaco Grand Prix. Oh, and if that wasn't enough, I'm also trying to get into the top 20% in the world on a track that I haven't driven on since F1 2017. So my first lap was honestly diabolical. As you can probably imagine, I try and avoid Monaco as much as possible, so this was the first time I'd driven the track since F1 2017. And to make matters worse, I hadn't driven an F1 car for over 2 weeks because I've been trying to set a supercar world record, which made this challenge even harder. Yeah, I'm not going to lie to you, this challenge doesn't start very well. However, I had 500 laps to improve, and trust me, I improved a lot. You might have noticed that I've almost spun about 20 times on this lap already, and this is because of how different traction is on an F1 car compared to a supercar. Honestly, it took me so long to actually relearn no traction control. But to be fair, if I was ever going to master no traction control, it is definitely by driving 500 laps of Monaco. Now we're coming up to the Nouvelle chicane, which is still giving me nightmares because of what you're about to see. I must have crashed into this wall about 100 times throughout this challenge because it is so difficult to nail. But to be fair, if I want to get into the top 20% in the world, I've only got to nail it once. Coming up to the back, I just broke way too early, which wasn't ideal, and if you compare my final personal best to this lap, it looks like someone else is driving the car. So yeah, this lap was pretty rubbish, but that was to be expected. To be honest, I was just pretty surprised that I didn't spin or invalidate because it definitely could have been worse. I had a horrible exit off the penultimate corner, and the final corner wasn't much better. In the end, I set a 1 minute 22.195, and I was now into the top 78% in the world, which was almost 60% away from where I wanted to be. And then 3 laps later, I made a massive improvement. I gained a full second through turn 1 by just not having a big wobble, and then through Mirabeau, I didn't do a Rosberg and gained even more time. I think it says a lot about my first lap that even though my entry was absolutely shocking into the hairpin and the run through probably was just as bad, I still managed to gain 9 tenths. And then through turn 7, I gained another half a second, which brought me to 2.5 seconds up on my delta. Somehow I didn't make any more progress on this lap, but my second improvement of this challenge was enough to put me below the 1 minute 20s, and now I was into the top 75% in the world. And guess what? 5 laps later, I made even more progress. You're genuinely about to see one of my best runs through the Nouvelle chicane, which tells you all you need to know about how bad I was at these couple of corners. I really don't think that I was expecting to have that good of an entry, but even still, on the exit, I was almost 3 seconds up to my delta. Annoyingly, I lost about a second through sector 3, but I had time to make up for it, and I was now into the top 71% in the world. It took me a while to make up for this poor final sector, but I managed to on lap 23. I had a pretty good run through to back and the swimming pool section, but I gained so much time through turn 15 and 16 where I went from 3 tenths up to 1.1 seconds up to my delta. I gained even more time through the penultimate corner, and even whilst crashing into the wall at the final corner, I still had a better exit than my previous lap. This improvement now put me into the top 65% in the world, and I was really starting to think that this challenge would actually be possible. And my final improvement of this first stint all came in the last 2 corners. I had a much better exit at turn 17, and through the final corner I didn't crash, which shockingly gained me time. I finished this first 50 lap stint with an improvement that gained me over 6 tenths. So yeah, things were going pretty well. In this first 50 lap stint, I'd gone up 16% in the world, and I knew there was loads of time to find, so the challenge was definitely possible. So my first 50 laps, at least for my standards, were actually pretty good, but I knew I wouldn't be able to make this many improvements every stint. However, I did actually start the second stint really well with an early improvement. Once again, I found time in the final 2 corners, and through the penultimate corner I gained 2 tenths, and then through the final corner I gained 3.5 tenths. This put me into the top 58% in the world, and I was really happy that I was starting with a solid improvement. And now I was really starting to build some momentum. Coming up to the Nouvelle chicane, I was 2.5 tenths up. However, I got so close to the apex and got a really nice exit, and this gained me 4 tenths. We'll quickly go through the rest of this lap, but as you can see, the gap to my delta fluctuated through the rest of sector 3, but ultimately stayed the same. In the end, I improved by 5 tenths of a second and moved 3% closer to my goal. And I was about to get even closer. On lap 70 of 500, I took a different line through turn 7, and this gave me 2 tenths, and although I didn't take a great line through turn 8, I increased the gap to the delta to 5.5 tenths. And I maintained this gain till the end of the lap. Annoyingly, this was my final improvement of this stint, which was so frustrating because I was desperate to get into the top 50% and I was only 1% away. And here's my 100th lap of this challenge. So far I've made 7 improvements and I still had 80% of this challenge left to go. For some reason it actually took me ages to get to my next improvement, however halfway through my third stint I was equal to my delta coming into the final corner. Luckily for me though, I got a much better exit than before and gained almost 2 tenths of a second, which at last put me into the top 50% in the world. 6 laps later I gained even more time in the final sector. I think at this point I was really understanding the track, and after 4 years of not driving around Monaco, things were really starting to pick up. Through turn 15 and 16 I figured out that I could actually jump over the curb, and I gained 6 tenths straight away, which was huge. I knew that it would be difficult to match my previous run through the final couple of corners, and annoyingly I lost a few tenths through them. However, I did maintain a green delta, and I finished the lap with a 4/10 gain, which put me into the top 44% in the world, and I knew that I was getting closer to my goal. And here's my 150th lap of this challenge, and I was slowly getting closer to the top 20% in the world. I'm not gonna lie, looking back I never realised how often I was gaining time in the final corner alone, but at least I know that I'm not a bottle job. Sadly, this was my only improvement of the 4th stint, but it was a pretty solid lap where I made even more progress. This lap put me into the top 39% in the world, and I knew that if I could start building on my first couple of sectors, I would start flying. Annoyingly, that would not be in this stint. However, with 60% of this challenge left to go, I just knew I had to keep driving, it would eventually come. So for some reason, between lap 200 and 250, I didn't make any improvements. I'll be honest, I was a little bit worried about this, but I knew that I'd made so much progress so far, and I was only halfway through this challenge, so improvements would come. However, I wasn't going to take the risk of not making any improvements anytime soon, so I messaged F1 esports driver Shanika Clay, who is a legend by the way, about what gears I should be using through the corners. I just felt like I was making mistakes on traction way too much, and I wanted to get it sorted out before it was too late. So it turns out that these F1 esports guys actually know their stuff. On lap 263 I made a pretty big improvement, which put me into the top 34% in the world, and then 30 laps later of learning new gears, I started finding even more time in the first sector. Coming through Massenet, I just got so much closer to the edge of the track whilst not invalidating, and I gained almost 2/10 of a second. Unfortunately, I lost a little bit of time going through Mirabeau by taking a worse line. However, through the hairpin I took a different line again to set me up for turn 7 and 8. This worked out perfectly, and even with me tapping the wall on the exit, I left sector 1 4.5 tenths up. I thought I'd take you through the rest of the lap just to show you how I was driving at this point. Honestly, I wasn't that consistent, and as you can see I lost a couple of tenths in sector 2 and 3. This wasn't ideal, but progress is progress. This lap put me into the top 32% in the world, but I knew a big lap was coming up soon. And this is the end of my 300th lap, and I was very happy with my progress so far. And this first sector might not have been big, but the first sector definitely was. I was just trying to really build on Shanika's advice and trying to get better at every individual corner. As you can see, this was working. Honestly, I've got no idea how I didn't invalidate on this lap, as I crashed into the walls multiple times, but it ended up working. I just seemed to be gaining time on every single corner, which was amazing considering I thought my previous personal best first sector was very good anyway. Once again, we'll go through the rest of this lap, and I almost maintained this gain until a little mistake through turn 15 and 16. However, that's where I need to make up time on the next lap. So I had quite a poor run through the penultimate corner, however somehow through the final corner I managed to drift through it, and I gained so much time on the entry and the exit. In the end, this lap put me into the top 28% in the world, but it was at this point where I realised that the lap that would get me into the top 20% in the world would have to be mega, because I still had a long way to go. And that improvement you just saw there was sadly my only bit of progress from this stint. Annoyingly though, after this for literally 100 laps I was struggling to improve on my personal best so much. I did make an improvement from lap 350 to 450, and I'm not gonna lie, I started to get really worried about whether or not this challenge would actually be possible. I knew that I needed to set an unreal lap, and it would have to be in the next 50 laps, because otherwise for the first time in this series I would have failed this challenge, and I was desperate to make sure that didn't happen.
Take a look around the room. Love comes wearing disguises. How to go about and choose. Break it down by shapes and sizes. I'm a man who's got very specific taste. Just my type. Oh, you got a pulse in you, I just my type. Oh, I think it's time to just my type. When there's loving in the air, don't fight it, just keep breathing. I can't help myself but stare. Double check for double meanings. I'm a man who's got very specific taste.
I had done it. In the end, I scraped into the top 20% in the world on lap 462 of this challenge, and honestly, I was so close to bottling it at the end. And here's my final lap of the 500. Thank you all for watching, and be sure to check out my other 500 lap videos and go and see how much I've improved since then.